Hey everyone, welcome back to RedTOOL Woodshop. In this video, we're going to finish up with making this end table. I'll show you step by step how to make the top, round the corners, and how to install it using some figure 8 fasteners. To get started, I grabbed a piece of white oak and measured out to cut this board into 3 sections that are roughly 16 inches long. The top's final dimensions will be 14 and 5/8 inch square. Next, I jumped over to the miter saw and used one of our Ultra-Shear 80-tooth miter saw blades to cut everything down to rough size. I like to break my boards down to smaller sizes when I can, mainly because it makes the milling process much easier, especially if there are any twists or cups in the board. To begin squaring everything up, I switched my MagQuick dust port to the joiner and then grabbed my push guards to face joint each board. Once I had one face squared up, I set that face against the fence and ran the edge through. To keep track of everything, I always like to mark an X on the face and the edge that I just squared up. Once I had one board done, I did the same thing to the other two before switching the dust collection over to the planer. I ran the board through with the jointed face against the bed, and then I took the thickness down to roughly 3/4 of an inch. After everything is all glued up in later steps, I'll send the whole thing through to take the thickness down to about 5/8 of an inch thick. To finish squaring everything up, I used this 30-tooth glue line rip blade to rip all the boards down to 5 inches wide. I'm cutting everything here a bit oversized at the moment because I like to do an additional step here to make sure that these boards come together seamlessly. Now you can see fresh off the saw, these boards probably release some tension, but they don't fit together as seamless as I'd like them to be. To fix that, I'm going to run each edge through the joiner. But it's important how you go about doing this. To keep things organized, I'm going to mark each board with a 1, 2, and 3. Next, I'll mark where each joint comes together, beginning with the word in, followed by the word out, and repeat the pattern across the boards. Over at the joiner, I'll go ahead and follow what I had just written down on those boards. If the edge has in written on it, then I'll run that edge through my joiner with that face up against my joiner fence. If it has out written on it, then I'll do the opposite. That face will be facing out as I run it through the joiner. Doing this ensures for a seamless glue up and accounts for any out of squareness with my joiner fence, creating a complementary angle that'll leave us with a perfect glue joint. Feel free to use this technique on all of your tabletops. I do this on literally every project, and it always leaves me with good results. To glue everything up, I brought out my expander clamp system. I was able to quickly set the spacing between the clamps, and then added some glue to the edges and clamped everything up. To clean up the dried glue squeeze out, I like to use this blue spruce chisel plane. Once I had one side cleaned up, I flipped it over and then did the same thing to the other side. Next, I ripped the top to a final width of 14 and 5/8 before sending it through the planer to bring the final thickness down to 5/8 of an inch. To finish cutting the top to size, I installed my crosscut blade and then squared up both ends of the top using my auto scale miter sled. Now this is the main tool that I like to use when cutting most anything to final size. Since it can handle any crosscut up to 28 inches wide, and it features a stop that can be set up to 51 inches on the standard version. I'd say 95% of my projects fit into that size range, and that's why I'd call this one of my favorite tools in my shop. The last bit of shaping I'd like to do to this top is just to add some curves to each corner. And I'm going to show you a few ways to go about doing that, using both our radius quick jig and the corner jig. I settled on doing a 1 3/8 inch radius on each corner, and I don't want to take that much material off with just a router, so I first traced the radius on each corner and then cut off the majority of the material at the bandsaw. Next stop was the router table, where I first wanted to point out that you want to make sure to start your cut on the edge grain and then end on the end grain to prevent tear out. Which means when you go to the next corner, instead of just turning your workpiece, you'll have to actually flip it over so you can feed your workpiece in the right direction. So you can see here what that looks like using the radius quick jig. After the first corner is done, I can flip it over and route the next corner. Now you can also use the corner jig at the router table as well. And to increase dust collection, you can use this free handguard that has a dust port on top where I can install my shop vac hose. Same thing as before, feed the workpiece from right to left, making sure to begin on the edge grain. What's cool about the corner jig is you can also use it with a handheld router as well. I like to use my Stable Max trim router base and this Ultra-Shear compression pattern bit. Unfortunately though, I forgot to hit record on this part, so here is a brief reenactment of what that looked like. With the corners all cut to size, the last thing I did to the top was add a small 1/8 inch roundover tall the edges. These two Fluke carbide tipped roundover bits are available in either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch shank, an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and a 1/2 inch radius. The 1/2 inch radius though is only available in a 1/2 inch shank. To install the top, I like to use these figure 8 fasteners. I first set my Polini pocket rule at a 1/4 inch and then scribed a line from the inside face of the apron. To drill the holes, I'll be using this Autoline drill guide with a 7/8 inch Forstner bit installed. To get the Autoline in the proper position, I lined up the two witness marks with the line that I just drew and then locked the fence in place by tightening these two brass knobs. As you can see though, the Autoline is a bit tippy since I'm working on only 3/4 inch thick material. To fix that, I grabbed two nice sized scraps and added some double-sided tape to each piece. Then I placed the Autoline back in its position and secured the blocks to the bottom of the base. Now the tool is nice and stable and it can slide back and forth with no problem. The last thing I went ahead and set up was the stop collar to drill just deep enough for the figure 8 fastener to nest in. To drill the hole, you want to make sure to use a drill and not an impact driver. Make sure to drill the hole completely until the chuck carrier bottoms out against the stop. Then I came back with an 1/8 inch drill bit to pre-drill for the screw. And finally, I installed the figure 8 fastener with the included screw just using a screwdriver. Make sure to install it leaving just enough slack so that the figure 8 fastener can move left and right to account for future wood movement. And after I had one installed, I was able to quickly repeat this process for the 7 remaining fasteners. Before I attached the top, I went ahead and finished everything using some Rubio Monocoat cotton white. To install the top, I first centered the base using my Polini pocket rule, and then I came back and marked each hole location with a Sharpie. Then I removed the base and pre-drilled each hole using an 1/8 inch drill bit. I put some blue tape on the end of my drill bit so I didn't accidentally drill all the way through my top. With the holes all pre-drilled, the last bit of work to do was to just align the top and screw it in place using a screwdriver. I hope you guys enjoyed this series on making this end table. If you missed any of the 2 previous videos on this build, please feel free to go back and check those out. If you have any questions at all, just leave them in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here on RedTOOL Woodshop.